I know a lot of you on the panel and as well as the invitee list, so I won't introduce myself for too long. But for those of you who I don't know, my name is Zubin. I'm an orthopedic surgeon by training and remain a practicing clinician while leading the health industries practice for PwC Singapore and Southeast Asia. One of our big focus areas at PwC is our Venture Hub health tech practice, and hopefully we're going to share some nice insights and have a good dialogue with our three founders here, who I think I will just very briefly introduce, and we can jump right into it if that's okay. So I think today it's a bit of an exciting session, part three of an initial three-part series. Today we're going to be covering wearable devices. We have picked three very interesting and very, very promising companies. And I guess to get things started and to address the sensitive nature of what Abhinav, Fai, and Gloria all do as CEOs and founders of these startups, is I might ask them to put things into perspective for us. Some people might find, what they do to be very taboo subjects. I think it's very, very interesting to raise awareness and educate people on the real problems that all three of these people are actually addressing. So if I could just ask all three of you, maybe we'll start with Gloria, right? How many people globally, and this will give everyone in the audience an idea of the kind of area your companies and you guys are focusing on, how many people globally actually suffer from urinary incontinence, especially in the female population? For you, Gloria, erectile dysfunction, from your point of view, Abhinav, and Parkinson's disease, other neurological diseases, and diseases with tremors for Fai. So maybe, Gloria, we can start with you just to put things into perspective.
Sure. Incontinence for women is 1 out of 4, and 1 out of 3 after a certain age, often starting with childbirth. And what I read is it affects over 200 million people globally.
Great, thank you, and a thank you for joining us. A big shout out. I know it's 4:30 in the morning in New York, so a great show of the passion and enthusiasm of what it is to be an entrepreneur. So thanks for joining us, Gloria.
Happy to be here.
Abhinav, how about you? Erectile dysfunction. How big is the problem?
Yeah, it's quite a big problem. So it's estimated around 320 million men worldwide are suffering from it. So just to keep those numbers into perspective, if all those men were collected in one country, that would have been a country bigger than Indonesia and almost the size of, you could say, USA. Wow. So it's a huge problem, highly stigmatized topic. Nobody wants to talk about it, but the numbers are just staggering.
That's pretty shocking and astounding numbers. Thank you. How about you, Fai? Neurological diseases, big taboo as well. A lot of people are embarrassed about.
Very stigmatizing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, very stigmatizing. Similar figures to Abhinav and Gloria. We're looking at 200 million people just for essential tremor, and about 20 million people with Parkinson's. And just for context, I mean, the most common neurodegenerative disease is actually Alzheimer's, and that only has about 34 million per year at WHO.
Right.
Just gives this.
Well, thank you guys for putting things into perspective. So, I mean, if you look at that, that's almost 1 billion people. The three of you and your companies are addressing a huge population, which is great. So, I guess maybe if we can kind of dive down a little bit deep, and before I have some specific questions for each of you, right? Just generally, and feel free any of you to jump in on this one. As a wearable device startup, right? What challenges did you face? This is always a question, government, private sector, investors always want to know, right? As well as your fellow startups. What challenges have you faced during fundraising? And we've often noticed that, some investors like to shy away from dealing with companies that manufacture their own product, especially if it's just one product. In fact, we were talking to an investor today who raised the same concern, but saying, if we pump in a lot of funding and it doesn't work, it's one product and that's it. What are some of these challenges that you faced in terms of fundraising, especially during COVID? Anyone care to share and get things going?
I can start. I think one of the challenges that I faced, out of many, is that wearable tech is inherently, a direct to consumer play. You're really addressing the needs of the consumer themselves, not in a hospital or in a doctor setting. So one of the problems that we have is it is a regulated medical device, and there are investors that say we do life science, we do medical devices because we can take that risk. Yet they don't like the consumer, direct-to-consumer aspect. That what they're used to is you have a salespeople, hire salespeople that go to doctors, and so once you say, you advertise online, they don't understand it, they don't like it, and then you have the consumer focused venture capital that they don't like anything that is regulated. And they don't, so we kind of fit both buckets, and so we don't really fit a lot of venture capital's mindset.
Interesting. Okay, Abhinav, I see you nodding there. You have thoughts on that? Do you agree? You have anything to add?
Absolutely, and what Gloria said is something similar we experienced, and on top of it, for us, we see there's a stigma around investing in erectile dysfunction space as well, because most of the time, especially in the early stages, the angel investors invest based on certain need which they relate to, and nobody wants to be related to erectile dysfunction somehow. So that's one aspect, and other aspect is that most of the investors would like to come in once we have reached or about to get regulatory approval. And because that's where they see the risk is being reduced. And something similar what Gloria said, that for them, it's easy to understand a product which is used in clinics or hospitals, because inherently they have the full business model in mind. So they could say like, okay, yeah, my salespeople or salespeople will go in, and then they could push the product forward. So wearable devices doesn't come very natural to many investors. And what we found that there are a group of investors or people who get it, and then there is a group of people who don't get it at all. So there's a very binary situation when it comes to investors' reaction to wearable tech, and especially stigmatized topics such as erectile dysfunction.
Okay, to the investors out there in the audience, we'll come back to this topic. Fine.
Yes.
What about you? What are your thoughts on this?
My thoughts of that at all, I mean, I agree with what Abhinav and Gloria have said. I think that's endemic to the rest of the world. At the end of the day, I think the angle I want to provide is that we're fundamentally dealing with behavioral psychology. At the end of the day, it's about, how people interact with others. So if let's say investors want to chase a deal, so therefore, there is inertia, there is momentum, as we know with every industry. There are trends in which people have to follow. There's also balance between risk versus reward. And again, with, the thing is, we are fundamentally faced with a situation where innovation, because innovation by definition, happens at, for example, the intersection of disciplines, right? But at the same time, that intersection means that it's uncharted waters, therefore there's risk there. So the venture capital, we have to really see, because that the way I put it personally is that it also stands for variable sort of capital, because you see a huge variation in terms of how people react. They can say that they want to do health tech, but not in this sort of space or that space, and it's always about a lot of people come in with the mindset that, look, you can always do better. You can always have less risk. You can always have more reward. And so they'll say, oh no, I'll wait for the next branch, the next milestone. And so that's an area in which you really perform. But the last point I want to make on this is, and this is maybe to investors, is that, again, I come from the sort of Benjamin Graham sort of like intelligent investor, old school corner here. If there's a way in which we could just have conversations about, with the founders and just to understand things really from the first principles, rather than just go through all these sort of box ticking sort of exercises, and, what's your competitive landscape, so and so forth, and really try to understand how the people actually think about building their own organizations, and how on the other side, how people actually want to build their own sort of venture VC firms, and what sort of rewards they want. If that was a way in which we do it, I find a lot more returns when we have those sort of conversations with all our investors.
That's very interesting. Maybe I want to go back to something that Gloria, that you said, and kind of challenge this. You know, you mentioned B2C play, right? You know, we've worked with a lot of startups over the years, and in the health tech space, I think personally, I feel that it has to be a balance. Depending on your product or solution. Certainly, B2C play is very important given the most important trend that we see, right? Consumerism or patient centricity. But what I've also found is the more successful models are generally a B2B play, or rather a B2B2C, right? So my question back to you is it really a B2C play that you know, companies like yourselves and others should be going down, or should it be a mix of B2B and B2B and B2B2C?
Yes, good point. We can't go around the physicians. They are, you know, the thought leaders in this area. We need them on board. So it's a mix. However, in our area, we are finding that the doctors, we need them to recommend the product and to, but they don't want to stock the product. They're not the purchasers. And so we do need to get both sides on board. So we do market to both.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And Abhinav, your point on stigma, I think, I mean, it is for all of you, right? The stigma that you guys face, but yet we're looking at 1 billion people globally. I mean, that's just amazing. How do you guys get around the stigma? You know, what do we need to do? You know, how do we change mindsets of investors, of people, even the users? Anything specific that you all have learned along your journey to address the stigma with these conditions?
Yeah, it's a very good and fair question. And I think it might change a bit from case to case. But in general, what I have, in our experience, what has worked is when we actually let the investors interact with a clinician who actually day in and day out see ED patients, or even share the testimony of some of the ED patient themselves, where they have actually highlighted what are the challenges they have themselves experienced. So that kind of brings a bit more, you could say, aha kind of a moment that they could see, like, yeah, traditionally the healthcare system has been where people are going to a clinic and getting a treatment or diagnosis done. However, for stigmatized topic, the only best and possible solution is where the clinic comes to them in the privacy of their home, where they could feel more comfortable and natural. And then a diagnosis or treatment could be provided to them. So that seems to resonate very well with investors, because in most of the cases also, when you are dealing with wearable devices, you don't have any precedent companies or you could say the products in the market, which you could say, like, look, this was the product which was doing like this, and we are bringing this innovation, and it would be an incremental one. And it kind of goes back to what Fai highlighted, that intrinsically wearable is a step forward in terms of innovation, not only from technology perspective, but also from how it fits into the existing clinical workflow.
Fai, Gloria, you guys have any comments on how we can address stigma better?
Well, in our case, I think stigma has to be handled in sort of, again, we try to frame this in sort of from a first perspective of principle, because in our cases, especially movement disorders, stigma itself is highly stratified. A person, I mean, for example, a younger crowd, a kid who can't use his hand has a very different set of issues to deal with versus somebody who who's a working professional versus somebody who just wants to go to pub as a retiree. And how do we then address and be able to have conversations around those areas? I think that's a very big challenge. Specifically, in our case, I mean, when we started off in 2015, 2016, 200 million people couldn't even talk about it, and we're facing both sort of institutional sort of pushbacks, because I mean, for example, numbers could be anywhere from 40 to 60% of people with essential tremor misdiagnosed, most likely with Parkinson's. And people don't actually, they are facing that stigma from their doctors, people they trust, And so that's one area. They don't have medication that works for them. So that's one area of constant need that we have. Number two, in terms of follow-up, especially here in Britain, that's a huge focus in terms of sort of community care, and even that is not necessarily done properly or at all with our beneficiaries. And lastly, I think then it comes down to just basic sort of needs. Again, from first principles, you have individuals who just want to use their hands, they just want to see their families, and to be able to target the so-called stigma in each situation requires specific, I would say, specific solutions to each of them. And in our case, it's number one, talking about that in the media, bringing out the fore, and number two, just having personal human connections with individuals. Because when you are the first people on the scene to actually want to talk about it, to want to talk about people, they actually light up. They say like, hey, I've never actually had a conversation with anyone else, and now because I've seen your videos online, and now I can talk to people about it. That has made that has just made a world of difference to me, you see. And then hopefully, as we try to expand our sort of the user base, then it becomes part of normal life in that sense, and we hope to do that in our own small way.
Thanks, Sai. Gloria, you're smiling there. You want to add anything before I go on?
So in our population, I mean, we're focusing specifically on women. So I think the numbers help, just saying it's 1 out of 3 women, and so that they know that they're not quite alone. Because when I say that, most women are surprised how common it is. And so it helps to, as I mentioned, to have that human touch to, I show a picture of myself on our website. So people realize, oh, here's the founder. She's, had 3 kids and suffered from this herself. And so they relate to that a little bit more. It's funny, on the flip side, it's so common that a lot of women think that it's a part of aging. It's just natural. And so they often don't seek treatment because they're like, oh, well, this is, I'm getting older.
Awareness and education is lacking, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, before I ask the next question, I might answer this question. An anonymous attendee has asked, why can sufferers not have direct access to an appliance for erectile dysfunction instead of having to get the item from an intermediary? Plus, there are medicines for dysfunction problems, and the problem for the sufferer may even be psychological. I mean, I'm going to give this a stab as a clinician myself, and Abhinav, you can correct me if I'm wrong or add to it. I think the first thing is you can, and the plan would be to get it direct to consumer. That option does exist for not just for erectile dysfunction, for a number of conditions, and I'm sure Fai and Gloria, as part of their strategy, there will be that option, and they're nodding. So that they agree with that. Medicines for dysfunction problems, certainly there are. Often they are not. They're not successful. And I think you make a very good point, anonymous attendee, that definitely it could be psychological. That always exists, and not just for erectile dysfunction, but for a number of other conditions. Maybe not Parkinson's or essential tremor, and maybe not stress incontinence, but certainly there are a number of medical conditions where the underlying cause is psychological or psychosomatic. So I hope we've answered that question for you. Anything to add, Abhinav?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fantastic question, and that's the key problem we are addressing. So our test is essentially at one end, it's differentiating between the different kind of erectile dysfunction. So rightly pointed out that erectile dysfunction could be either physiological in nature or psychological in nature. And right now, there are no simple objective tools available to clinicians or even for consumers to purchase anonymously online, which they can use in the privacy of the home. And that's the gap we are addressing. The second part where it is that why it's not available to the consumer directly is something we learned from our mistake. We started with the B2C kind of approach because for us, 60% of the patients are not going out and seeing a doctor, and privacy and stigma is the main reason. And in Asia, that number is actually even staggering. In Japan, it's estimated around 95% of ED patients are not going and seeing a doctor. So for us, it was like, wow, we should go forward with B2C. But what we realized that from regulatory standpoint and reimbursement standpoint, the scene is not there yet. And they're still playing a catch-up game. And we completely understand that bypassing clinicians or bypassing, you could say, the traditional payer model is a lot more risky, and we have to take baby steps. And that's where we changed our B2C approach to B2B2C, where we we go with the clinician first approach, and then later on would be able to even reach out directly to customers as the regulatory and reimbursement scene improves.
Okay, thanks for that. Gloria, I might come back to you actually and just ask generally, what actually made you decide to tackle incontinence? You mentioned that earlier that it was a personal experience for you as well, and thank you for being so candid. But did you find that tackling such a niche and definitely unaddressed topic and market brought about a fresh set of challenges to you that often other startups and maybe not so stigmatized conditions face? Was there anything different?
Definitely, there was a lot of things. Well, so first, I had a urology startup before this current startup. So I saw that the urologists, had this problem, or was dealing with this problem, but they were quick to do surgery, and there was a gap in treatment models for a lot of the other doctors that we talk to as well. So the gynecologists see the women first, and they didn't really have anything to offer the patients. But also at the same time, in these last 8 to 10 years, there have been a lot of issues, which presents as an opportunity regarding the surgery for incontinence. So the pelvic mesh has been banned in a lot of countries. A lot of doctors have stopped doing that because of liability. Yeah. So it was an opportunity to come out with something more conservative. On that same note, we weren't finding much response from the urologists with our product. Yeah, urologists are 98% men. So, we had to do a lot of interviews to see what's the right fit. Who are the doctors that we really need to talk to and go after? And we did find a more receptive audience with the gynecologists. But it did. So even before that, I was in orthopedics, and that's generally well accepted in the investor community. When we started to pitch, we were facing the same thing, in that this is a problem mostly for women. The investors like to invest in something they understand and they know. I still remember going to an angel group that had 50 angel investors, only 2 women in the whole room. And, even if I say 1 out of 3 women, I heard from someone else later that the first question they asked is this really a problem? I've never really heard about it. It can't be really a problem. And so that's one of the issues we faced.
Okay, thanks. I guess it's a nice segue. Maybe what I might ask you, given what Gloria has said in terms of Parkinson's, essential tremor, right? Why do you feel that there is inadequate amount of available treatments at present for diseases causing tremors? And what would you say have been the tipping points for you and Gyro Gear that has helped you gain traction?
All right. Okay, so I just want to preface this by saying maybe sharing 2 values that have been very important to us in this journey. Number 1, having humility, and secondly, a good amount of integrity in this. So these 2 values come into play in my explanation, because that humility allows you to really understand and open yourself up to options, to solutions, and to problems. That helps you, that leads us to the first part of your question. And secondly, that integrity basically sees you through, because, at the end of the day, right, you have to be able to call it. If it's a problem, you have to call it. the reason why it's difficult to treat is because people have, number one, from a biological standpoint, we're looking at, issues that are, based on your brainstem, deep within your brain. And I mean, right now, the sort of, in terms of devices, the sort of top of the line treatment basically is, having electrodes 16 centimeters long in each hemisphere, all the way down to your sort of, brainstem soft level. And, in our case, I mean, I'm going to Devan's question. I think he was chatting on the side here. He mentioned that, what about other sort of therapeutics? But I mean, we're looking at, for example, people putting, sort of delivering sort of small molecules to the brain. That was done at Bristol. The professors advising us. Again, that failed because the brain is highly, highly protected. The next one also is, for example, I think there are only 2 studies, smaller one in the US and larger one in Japan with looking at implanting, I think, mesenchymal cell stem cells in the brain just to rehabilitate and regrow the sort of like degenerative tracts. And even so that, to be able to scale up to an actual therapy in that sort of field, it's I would say, if you can spend only just 20 years and $2 billion, you're lucky. So that's why it's difficult. But then again, we have to realize that it's not just a biological issue as sometimes we think as clinicians. There is a whole systemic sort of thing. For example, I think some things we don't want to talk about is that, look, movement disorders and hand tremors, it's not very sexy as a career. I mean, imagine specializing as just, specializing in shaky hands, right? I see you sort of smirking as an orthopedic surgeon, so that's another matter. But, so the whole point is that you are facing, at every single point, going back to a point about stigma, every single person has this stigma against you. Premise, they don't want to solve it. It's not exciting. It's not sexy. The problem is hard. So, what the hell for literally? So that's why we have to come in. And to go back to your second part of the question, how then did you get traction? How do you bring it to market? So on and so forth. I think the more fundamental issue again is going from basics. Again, having the humility, having the integrity to basically, number one, and like in our case, when I was going through this whole medical journey, I was, as a good Singaporean, we love to complain, so we love to pick up problems. And so, you're systematically collecting all your sort of gripes, in the medical space, you see. So every disease, there's a condition, it's not solved, how do you solve it? You just basically fantasize when you're not studying. So all of those things then leads to, to you being able to collect from a very large base, all the good sort of ideas and sort of high impact, but feasible sort of concepts. And then you develop that. And then from that sort of standpoint, then you go and you try your best to shoot for the moon. You try and develop the best product in the space, lowest risk, lowest regulations, easiest path to market, but maintaining the sort of maximal sort of impact. And that's what I picked up again with my time in Boston. So then based on that, then that sets you up to be able to develop traction because from first principles, you've developed a quality product that people need in a market that's very large, but also in a market that has very few competitors. And to be able to find and to target that, especially in the healthcare space where everyone is doing everything, has been a very, very lucky sort of moment for us. And I hope that gives a sort of background, as an answer to your question.
Thank you for that. Interesting. I'll come back and maybe make a joke on the humility part and tell you why I was smoking as an orthopedic surgeon. I thought you said smoking. I don't smoke, but okay. Abhinav, maybe I can ask you a question. Sure. I'd say, I mean, there's no objective activity in this comment, but if I look at the 3 conditions all of you are saying, I'd probably make a guess that if we look at it, your condition that you guys are addressing is probably the most taboo or least spoken about, kind of the most embarrassing. So what are common misconceptions actually that people have regarding erectile dysfunction? And how can we actually, or how can you, or how do you plan to combat these misconceptions and communicate more effectively? It comes back to what we said earlier, right? Talk about it. We all need to talk about it a lot more, which is the purpose of today, right? We wanted to bring 3 taboo subjects. So can you share with us some of the misconceptions?
Yeah, very interesting question. And I think one of the biggest misconception is it's older men's disease. That's not the case. It's always like when we think of erectile dysfunction, we think of Viagra and old men. But in reality, around or right now, 1 in 4 men going and seeing a doctor is actually less than 40 years of age. So that should reflect that it affects men of all ages, which we typically tend to miss out. And there is a big group of younger population, which most likely, or they have a higher chance of suffering from the psychological erectile dysfunction, that they find themselves lost because there's a reason why erectile dysfunction is called impotence, because when somebody suffers from it, they feel powerless. And when it hits them, they actually see like, wow, I'm too young to actually have this. So they even don't go out and see a clinician. So that's one of the key, you could say, myth about erectile dysfunction, that it's an old man's problem. The second one is that it's a problem which could be fixed by taking a blue pill like Viagra or Cialis. If we look at the official data from Pfizer, or now I think it's been transferred to another company, Viagra only works in around 65 to 69% of cases. So, and that's the official data. If we look at statistics on the patient satisfaction numbers, that actually number falls down to only 35%. So as a pill, as an option, is only useful for 1/3 of the population. And there are a lot of solutions available which will work for most of the patient, but due to lack of education or even lack of diagnosis in the early stages, those solutions are not being told, or the patient is not onboarded that okay, pills may not work for you. Maybe a vacuum pump would be a good solution, or if the situation is even worse, then a penile prosthesis might be equally a good solution. So it kind of goes back to partly to education, how we are addressing the problem, and we are seeing actually very interesting trends compared to previous generation. There's a huge spike in ED cases, and there's been a lot of debate whether it's on the rise or it is just kind of like better reporting. And what we have been hearing from clinicians is that it's partly to do with the better reporting part, because now more and more younger patients are coming out and saying like, I have a problem, how can I get it fixed? So we are already seeing some positive trends, and I believe if there's a way, maybe through more education or awareness, that it could be aspirated, then it would be good for everybody.
Hi, you kind of nodding. Did you have a comment or anything to add? Or?
I was going to say that. I mean, again, from both the sort of from the standpoint of both a physician and sort of a founder, it's all in the name. Like in our case, right? To add on to what Abhinav has said, essential tremor was just called benign essential tremor before. And typically, when you tell a patient that it's a benign essential tremor, they will typically go like this: it's not an expletive, benign sort of tremor. This is actually severely affecting my life, you see. And when it's sometimes we say it's all in the name, right? And even as in the hospital sort of setting, because we think it's a benign essential tremor, so therefore we don't really think much of it, and that this disadvantages everyone in the community because of the name, just like that.
That's an interesting perspective. I didn't think about it that way.
It's a very common thing from our patients. Like, why is the doctor calling it benign? It's clearly a hugely debilitating sort of condition.
Okay. Might move instead of myself asking a question. There are two questions in the audience. Might ask the first one, anonymous attendee. What are you doing to address data privacy issues with wearables? And I'd like to also give a comment on this and then open it up to the three panelists. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. Often, depending on the whether it's a diagnostic, a therapeutic, depending on where the data is, often devices like this don't have the issue of data privacy, especially if it's direct to consumer, right? It's for your own purpose, your own use. No information gets uploaded anywhere. But in cases which there are concerns, this is the comment I wanted to share. I'm going to play a bit of devil's advocate here. Health data strategy is one of the biggest things we've been working on in the last year at PwC. And what I want to challenge people on is what actually is the big deal, right? We often make a big hullabaloo about data privacy, and in the Singapore context, often clients, friends, colleagues always quote that, oh, look what happened, publicly, which was in the Straits Times, the Sing Health attack, etc. My challenging comment would be, so what? And data privacy, is it really a concern? There are going to be breaches with any and all companies. The more important thing is, how do you address it? How do you mitigate it? What do you do? But I'd also like to see this idea that why are we so caught up with it when it comes to health? If you think about it, when we go to a restaurant, we give our credit card to the waiter or waitress, and they have our credit card number and name. When we go onto social media, so much of our personal information, sometimes a lot more than what your medical information is, you share it freely. So is it really a concern? I'll leave it at that, but I'd love to hear the three panelists talk about their thoughts on how they address data privacy. Any of you? Or is it not really applicable?
Maybe I can share some thoughts. So definitely, I think data privacy, even if it's not kind of forced through legislature, it is an important aspect, especially in our case, because we are tackling a problem where majority of patients are not going out and seeing a doctor due to privacy concern and stigma around it. So it becomes it becomes very important to us to ensure that even if we are working together with the diagnosis we are providing, that that privacy concern is already being captured. And one of the approach we have done is we have reduced the number of steps where the data is being transferred. So for example, our earlier version was the data from the device is transfers to a smart device or smartphone, you could say, and then is pushed to our backend system for the diagnosis. We realized that that's one, we cannot control the hardware. Phones could be jailbroken or rooted. So there will always be a concern around data leak from the intermediary device. So how we can bypass this, we actually now transfer the data directly to our backend system without going through that intermediary step, which we cannot control. So that's one aspect we are addressing. We are ensuring that the privacy or the data concern is addressed properly. Now, going back to the original question, you said why it is important. To touch a bit further upon that, we intrinsically feel in a way that it's a human nature to be a bit more conservative about things. And especially when the medical data goes out, it could be used against people. So there have been cases where people secretly smoking, actually their employer may get to know, or the insurance company, if they get to know, then it changes or affects their insurance premium. So likewise, there are merits of issues around or thoughts when somebody look at medical data going into wrong hands or being used against the patient.
Great, thank you for that, Abhinav. They're absolutely valid points. Gloria, Fai, do you have anything to add on the data privacy issue? Or?
Sure.
Not really.
Okay, so perhaps another anecdote. I think, in the 70s, basically, the chairman of GM went out to, comes to mind. The chairman of GM went out to Japan to visit a couple of factories, including that of Toyota. And he was very surprised as to why the Japanese were doing a lot better in terms of efficiency, etc. And I think this also alludes to the data privacy, or sort of how we manage healthcare, actually. As we build a whole sort of industry, I mean, in the 70s, the chairman of GM basically said, I mean, he found out that the Japanese were actually designing sort of much higher tolerances into their cars. So they didn't have to, for example, use a rubber mallet to basically, bang their doors into place, so to speak. The Japanese were just, drilling things in. And my concern here and this is something I would like to open this floor maybe to Zubin and to the panelists here, is given that anecdote and how we're approaching building our own healthcare systems, are we, banging solutions in at the end of things, or are we trying to design things, really from first principles into the health system? The anecdote I like to have is that, again, aside from, COVID management, let's just leave it as that first. Aside from COVID management, I was, over the last 2 years, there's been an explosion in terms of data in the UK, and also we see also in the States, but primarily in the UK. There's a lot of talk about how data will come and save us all. So, for example, the NHS, there's no need to basically hire more doctors, or have better sort of data management sort of systems, or even just basically having digital systems instead of just reams and reams of paper. And that AI basically will save us all, you see. So the problem with that sort of approach is that when you're building things in that sort of haphazard manner, and then you're bringing in all these data privacy issues, every small mistake that happens in terms of when you have 1 million data points, no human can manage that. And no human can then, it's going to be very difficult to program the systems to make sure that, your data is basically safe, secure, and also more importantly, how do you discriminate, again, from a collection sort of standpoint? So in our case, then, to bring this conversation down to our specifics, or like startups in our case, again, from first principles, how do we then decide what is relevant? Does everybody need to know how their tremors are, for example, deteriorating? For most people, yes, but some people, no. And how do we know that they know about this, you see? Again, and then, because if they don't know about it, and we are taking, for example, all that data, and then they can easily say, look, I mean, it's not a concern to us, it's a breach of privacy, and then it opens a whole kettle of fish, you see. So there are all these multiple issues in the entire sort of vertical. So again, that's something that, we're just grappling with, both philosophically and also in terms of implementation.
Very interesting philosophical comments by.
It's a morning, I have my coffee.
No, it's an interesting topic, and on the data front, for years, what we're seeing with the use of data is nothing new. In Singapore and Asia, I think we're far behind Europe and the United States. I think those who are well versed with this space will realize that we're not saying data is gonna solve everything. Certainly the use of data is going to solve a number of problems. It is going to improve efficiency and productivity of individuals and organizations. And I think, you mentioned, what do startups or companies need to do? At the end of the day, you're absolutely right, Fai. Different companies, you need to filter out what data is important and for whom, right? And there are many simple ways of identifying and categorizing data. I think that's the first thing that organizations need to do. But if I can give an overall picture when we talk about data, especially health data, just to put things into perspective, I was saying I played devil's advocate. I personally feel that health data is very different from any other data, financial data or otherwise. It's a very personal thing, right? It's about your body, your mind, your health. On the black market, you can get credit card data for 50 cents, whereas basic biometric data, you can get anywhere from $250 to $400 US for basic biometric data. So that just shows how in demand it is. But I think at the end of the day, when you look at data, you need to look at it as a spectrum, and what is the value that data can provide. And if you look at that spectrum, traditionally, organizations or companies might have, pen and paper, all written down, manual kind of processes. If you then move to the next step, you want to get a kind of system in place. And so you have, a data information system. So it's a little bit more categorized. If you then are able to run some analytics on that, you can generate insights. By generating insights, you can then generate actions based on the insights that you generate. And then from those actions, you can find what value are you providing to individuals or organizations. And that value can be monetary or non-monetary. And I think as you mentioned, Fai, what organizations or startups or anyone needs to do is, okay, what are those parts of the data that will provide that value at the end of the day from a monetary and non-monetary perspective? And then you work it out. And when you do, you have to ensure that you've got, the taxonomy right, all the terms standardized. You need to obviously follow the Data Protection Act, PDPA in Singapore, GDPR in Europe, and Singapore, HIPAA in the US, etc. right? And then once you've mapped it out and realized what you can and cannot share, how do you anonymize it, etc. You need to make sure that you ensure the right governance is in place, identity access management is in place, put in the right mitigation steps, and ensure that cybersecurity is adequate. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you will be breached and what you do with that. So I hope that kind of gives a bit of an overall perspective and thoughts to people. If we move on, some more questions from the audience. Someone asked, how will the wearables of the future be worn? Seems like it's mostly wristbands and smartwatches only. I think, again, I'm happy to kind of give a quick stab, and if any of the panelists want to jump in and share, I don't think we would agree with that. There are a number of wearables. It really depends. You can get wearable contact lenses, actually, that already exist today, that have Wi-Fi in them, that take parameters from the fluid in the eye. You can have patches on the skin. You can have gloves, shoes, anything and everything, necklaces, wrist, the whole gamut. It really is variable. I wouldn't say it's mainly wristbands and smartwatches. Panelists, any thoughts or comments on that one?
I mean, you're also looking at sort of hybrid devices. I mean, for example, in Zubin's space, they're now sort of, even implants now have data capturing sort of functions that communicates with an external wearable device. So that's another area.
Yeah. Gloria, anything to add? Abhinav, anything to add?
Yeah, maybe I would disagree with the comment, because partly because wearables have been there, and one of a classical example could be a pacemaker. It's been there for decades, and what's probably was not there was the smart component, where the getting the insight from the pacemaker and seeing like, okay, how we can actually improve the firing of the pacemaker to kind of optimize the performance was probably not there earlier, and due to the recent technological development, we are seeing that capability coming in. And also, so from with that thought, if we look at moving forward, we will actually be seeing a lot more devices and a lot more products, or a lot more wearables, which would be either going inside a body, or will be will be worn outside, where the data is being captured, is being used for our benefit. And again, there's a privacy concern, but keeping those apart and assuming that those are addressed. So this space is going to see a lot more innovative products coming out, especially for conditions which are being ignored, which clinicians or doctors don't want to tackle. Something what Fi highlighted and Gloria also highlighted, or applicable to erectile dysfunction as well. Nobody wants, no doctor wants to be an expert in erectile dysfunction. Everybody wants to be, every urologist wants to be great in oncology, etc. So
no, I want to be an orthopedic surgeon, Abhinav.
yeah, that might also be the case. So we will see that gap will be filled by wearables, and the value those wearables can bring in will be enormous. And we are just kind of COVID-19 has given a bit of a taste of what is possible, because now we are seeing a disruption in the traditional patient going to a clinic model with the teleconsultations happening. So just imagine that now in future, in the coming time, and I think it might already be happening in some of the places, that you can have a normal checkup with your cardiologist, where the cardiologist is seeing your ECG data, both historically and at the moment, and could say like, okay, yeah, this medication is working, or we should optimize this dose. So we will be seeing wearables coming to not only fill the gap which is there in the way the healthcare system is designed, but also creating a lot more value and bringing more patient-centric touch to the whole care delivery.
Interesting. Gloria, do you have any comment on that one, or nothing?
No, I agree. Just I think wearables are going to be anywhere on your body, which that will either take in information from your body or treat.
Yeah, I think they may be even inside your body. Some years ago when we were working on what the future of diagnostics was looking like, we talked about health technology, and I would ask everyone in the audience just to remember the internet. I think we were all around when the internet first came, right? And if you think about it, when the computer was first started, right, you had to go into this big room with that big computer, right? So you had to go to the internet, or the internet didn't even exist. Then computers and the the internet came to you. It took 5 minutes to start up your computer, right? And with those disks. And then computers came into the home, right? With PCs, they got smaller. They became the mobile phone. You carried the computer in your pocket. And then now we actually have the computer within us, right? So technology exists today where you can wear contact lenses and search the internet, holograms on your skin. These aren't mainstream yet, but that technology exists today. And we have technology in health tech where nanobots are swimming in your bloodstream and in real time releasing information about blood parameters. So all that exists today. So I agree with all the panelists that in the future, wearables are going to be in you, on your clothes, however it is.
I mean, the one-liner we have from our team is, basically, it's the way we describe it is that it's like a cat meme. If it fits, it sits. So, as long as it's applicable to the body, you get data from it. Anything goes, basically.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Another question. We have about maybe 5-6 minutes, so we'll try to get through a few more of these questions. What are some of the more effective ways of encouraging patients to adopt wearables? The doctor in me simply says, prove the outcomes. You prove the outcomes and you incentivize people in the right way, that will be more effective. What are your thoughts, panelists? More effective ways of encouraging patients to adopt wearables?
In some ways, it's what's the alternative? Like for incontinence treatment, the alternative is going to a physical therapist every week for 6 weeks. Patients don't often have the time to do that. So wearables often save time, and especially in the comfort of your own home. I think that's a real big factor.
Any other comments on that one?
Happy to go, if so.
Yeah, go
ahead. Actually, sorry, could you repeat the question again, just with the mind?
Encouraging people to adopt wearables. What can we do?
Oh, okay. So in terms of adopting wearables, right? Again, going back to sort of behavioral psychology. At the end of the day, I mean, Zubin mentioned that if we, for example, give incentives, etc., that would, of course, it would push people towards that incentive or certain sort of a direction. But what we see also is that there is also inertia and momentum in terms of how we actually deploy that incentive and how we, for example, actually get people to really identify with that incentive. So, for example, what I mean that, for example, in our space, just because there is medication doesn't necessarily mean people will be compliant as much as it helps them. I mean, typical case, I mean, 70-year-old says, I completely forgot about my meds, even though my hands are shaking. And there is no sort of cognitive sort of association between taking the meds and actually having a stable life in that sense. So these are typical questions we deal with in healthcare as well. And from our lids, again, as a small startup, we have to be cognizant that we're only a small startup and there's only so much we can do. But what we found to be really high impact is that, again, bringing the problems and personalizing them and also personifying them and being able to have those, conversations with our beneficiaries. Look, this is actually a problem for yourself. They know it, they know that it's a huge pain point. And when they finally realize that actually this is a pain point that they can solve and that, something is just within grasp, then, it makes it so much easier for them to just, to use it. I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, since we're talking about the internet and things, it's for example, the difference between Apple, Amazon, and all the other sort of, the other competitors. They've made the process of selling something so easy, whereas us in healthcare, we've made it such that you have to get a prescription, you have to go and, speak to Zubin, he has to drill into you, you have to go see a physiotherapist, so on and so forth, and he has to, everything costs money on top of that. So that whole chain is very different from what you are used to as a consumer, as a regular functioning human in society. And those huge discrepancies and differences really does, I would say, in a complex world, prevent people from actually wanting to, just invest in whatever helps them. Actually, it's a very perverse way. But
just to add on to what you said, Fai, you said personalize, the benefit. Absolutely. I always give the example, when I used to run clinics at the university hospital, if you tell a diabetic, a 60-year-old male diabetic, you really need to lower your HbA1c, you need to do this, they're not going to do it, right? But the minute you ask them, hey, what's important to you? And they say, well, taking my grandson ice skating is important. And then you say, well, look, if you do this and you drop that, you'll be able to take your grandson ice skating. That becomes different. So I think you're absolutely right. Personalization is a big component. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead, Abhinav.
Yeah, if I could add to what Gloria and Fai shared, for uptake of wearables, I think one of the other, or the key point is how it fits into the healthcare system and clinical workflow. And a classic example could be a pedometer, which is kind of or granddaddy of all the fitness trackers we have. And interestingly, pedometers in late 90s were reimbursable, which would be prescribed by the clinician for weight loss or for particular kind of a condition. And the clinician will have the oversight on the performance. Now with the wearables, or in a way, the wearables are caught in this B2C mindset, where it's for most of the consumers, it's just a good to have product, not a must have product. And also the approach or the way healthcare systems have been traditionally seeing it is also that wearables are kind of good to have product. It's not medically necessary. So we need to work a lot more towards how a particular wearable fits into the clinical workflow, and what kind of information or insights could be derived, which could help then the clinicians or the healthcare system to make better decisions.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, listen, thanks everyone for the responses. In the interest of time, and I do know that a couple of people are starting to drop off, I might just quickly respond to two of the questions and then leave one question open to the panelists from Dave. So I think Sheila said a thought. I assume that smoking cannabis, etc., will affect erectile function, but does excessive smoking also do that, as the penis does not need an available blood and nerve supply the penis does need an available blood and nerve supply to achieve an erection. Essentially, Sheila, again, just from a medical perspective, smoking does constrict arteries and vessels, so it does reduce blood flow across the entire body, and it's well known to cause a number of conditions. So certainly it will be affected in erectile dysfunction. To answer that, anonymous attendee, how viable are wearables in emerging market conditions? And this is a good question, especially for smart or next generation wearables. Are they not cost prohibitive and the market is not yet mature enough to adopt this tech? Will this further increase the health gap? I'd like to just quickly answer this. If you'd like to send me a personal message or email me, I will actually send you a report that answers this question in detail. In short, the answer is they are not necessarily cost prohibitive. It really depends on the pricing strategy and the market, the return on investment. And we've written a nice report a couple of years ago that talks about digital health and the challenges and the solutions in terms of return on investment. So if you would like that report, you can actually Google it. It's publicly available. If not, message me privately, and I'm happy to share that with you. And then I guess the one comment I'll leave before summarizing and wrapping things up, Daven has said, I think having star endorsement or public figures coming forward to talk about such issues lifts the veil on the stigma and taboo. I was actually thinking about this at the beginning of the webinar. I totally agree. And he's asking, would there be foundations or perhaps people who could come forward to work with you on the campaign? Startups tend to always think bootstrap, but how can you mobilize people to understand what you are doing by engaging over social media with star endorsement? Great question. Is it something that the three of you have thought about? And if it is, I'm very curious to know, okay, again, maybe in Fai's case, stars might be more open to it. But Gloria and Abhinav, have you guys thought about it? And if you have, have you seen pushback? Would celebrities and stars be open to saying, hey, I suffer badly from urinary incontinence and erectile dysfunction?
Well, we always thought it would be great to have a star endorsement, but I mean, we're so small that we haven't really approached anyone.
Do you think you would have challenges if you did though?
Oh, yes, definitely. Nobody wants to be associated with urinary incontinence, or I mean, we have women who don't even want to like us on social media for fear of friends seeing what they've liked, or so that's always going to be a challenge.
That's interesting. Abhinav, you're nodding and smiling. You have something to add before we wrap things up?
Yeah, completely agree with Gloria on that. And in fact, kind of partly it ties into the budget. So if we have a good investor, and if it's a question from an investor in the panel, please do. We'll be happy to explore that possibility. And it kind of goes back to also that those kind of endorsement cost quite a bit, and but they're very effective. In the erectile dysfunction space, HIMSS a couple of years ago got Snoop Dogg to say that he's taking these vitamins which is helping him with erectile dysfunction, and they saw a jump in sales for the multivitamins and some of the products they were addressing or selling towards erectile dysfunction. So definitely it works, but for companies which are focusing on clinicians first, it may not be the first solution from marketing perspective to consider. It would be more towards how we can get KOLs to endorse and kind of spread the message. And once the clinicians are using it, then we start focusing on consumers, and then those strategies may be very effective.
Okay, thanks. So listen, I'd like to just kind of wrap things up and thank all three of you for your time. Really appreciate it, especially Gloria, given the time difference. I think if I could summarize maybe just a couple of 3 or 4 take-home points. I think first of all, you guys are doing a fantastic job addressing a really big market, 1 billion people globally. That still might be an underestimate with conditions collectively from the problems that your companies are addressing. So very big problem. Great that you're addressing it. I think let's talk about it more. I liked one of you, I can't remember, one of you said you're not alone. That message is very powerful message in conditions that you guys are addressing as well as others. So let's continue to have dialogues. Let's be open about it, and let's talk about it more. I think regulatory and reimbursement are still issues in regard to B2C. So for the startups out there, very important lesson when you're working out your strategy. Do you focus on a B2C, a B2B, a B2B2C? What are the pros and cons? And really think through that carefully, right? Personalize the benefit when you're talking to potential customers and investors, because that really resonates well. And I think the most important lesson, I really like what Fai said, humility and integrity. I think at the end of the day, let's work towards high impact solutions for problems that really need to be addressed. And whatever it is, how successful you are, let's all remain humble and continue to have integrity, especially when we're dealing with health and people. So thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it. Hope all the participants have found this insightful. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to the panelists. They're all on LinkedIn or contact them via email. Thank you. Have a good evening. And Gloria, have a good day if you're not going down to bed.
Thanks for bringing us all together, guys.
Thank you.
Take care.